Today's video isn't going to be the most exciting in the world, but I thought I'd take a look at this torque screwdriver set I've bought. Now, for people who don't know, essentially a torque screwdriver is a screwdriver that you can set a torque setting on, so that when you've got the screw to the correct level of essentially tightness or torque, it'll click and then not turn anymore. It's similar to the torque adjustment you'll get on like an electric drill, although that isn't really calibrated to any sort of scale, but it's a similar idea where you get the screw tight enough and then it stops turning it. And these are becoming quite popular for electrical work, especially in the UK. On a lot of devices such as circuit breakers, the manufacturer will now actually specify a torque setting you're meant to do the screws to. And in the UK that's measured in a unit called Newton meters. And according to the UK electrical regulations, as far as I can tell, I'm not an electrician, they do say that you should install things to the manufacturer's instructions, which means if your circuit breaker states that it should be done to a certain torque setting, you should actually do it to that. Now, I'm not an electrician as I mentioned, so I don't really need this, but I do a bit of my own stuff around the flat, and I thought I'd rather actually have a torque screwdriver just to make sure I'm definitely doing things correctly. Additionally, I just needed a set of new VDE screwdrivers, because I've got a couple of old ones and they're all falling apart and getting old. So I wanted to get a new set of VDE, or high voltage safe screwdrivers. And the cool thing with this set is it's actually really affordable compared to other torque screwdrivers. So I decided to go for it just instead of a normal set without a torque screwdriver because this is so affordable. But there isn't really much information about this online, so I thought I would take a look at it and just do a quick video just to really show it. Now when it comes to screwdrivers, I'm normally a bit of a snob and I tend to basically exclusively use Vera screwdrivers. However, in terms of price, the cheapest really sort of complete set from Vera is about £135 for a torque screwdriver. And then if you want the set that includes the non-torque handles, which I did want, that's £150. In terms of other brands, we do a set, and that's about £125, and that includes both handles, but that's still quite expensive. Whereas this set is only £80, which includes all the bits, 2 non-torque handles we'll take a look at, and the torque handle. So, at least on paper, that seems like insanely good value. So yeah, even though that's more expensive than just buying a non-torque screwdriver set, at £80, you're only maybe paying about £40 more to get the torque handle, so it seemed like a decent idea. Additionally, one of the things I do plan on doing around the flat is replacing all my sockets and switches. When I moved in, I kind of half did them with nice metal ones, but then didn't start the budget to finish it, so I've spent about several years just with half the switches metal and half the switches plastic, and I've not done it yet. So I finally decided to go and actually buy the rest of them and replace them all. And actually, the new ones actually specify a torque setting, which I wasn't expecting. So I've gone for these, which are click to fine brushed stainless steel sockets and switches. I've only got the sockets at the moment, the rest haven't turned up. But inside the box, you've obviously got the socket, but then it has a little bit of paper. And on the back, this actually does now state a torque setting. It's down here, it says like, torque value, terminal screw, 2.5 Newton meters. Now, I haven't got the switches and the fuse connection units and stuff yet, they haven't arrived yet, but as far as I can tell on the Skolmore website, they also supply torque settings. I think officially that would mean that you are meant to do it up to that, and I imagine most people won't. And to be honest, I really don't need to, it's a bit over the top, but I would feel a lot more confident in replacing these if I knew I was getting the torque setting correct. And that's because I am pretty bad for over-tightening stuff. I'll tighten it up a bit and go, oh, I'm not sure if that's correct, tighten it a bit more, and then before I know it, I've tightened it and flattened the copper out totally and it snaps off. Additionally, when I'm, say, putting a socket or switch on the wall, what I like to do is tighten the screws up, push it flat to the wall to get the wires to settle back into the correct position, pull it off the wall a little bit, and tighten it a bit more just to make sure they haven't settled and moved. And in doing that, again, I'm quite bad for over-tightening it, just keeping doing it a little bit more. So I also feel that having this, even though it's way over the top doing it, I feel using this to put the sockets and switches on could also be quite good, because now that I do have a appropriate torque setting to use according to the instructions, I can just be sure that I'm not over tightening it by just having it limit it. So even if I'm taking it off the wall and just tightening it up a little bit after moving it, I'm not worrying about over tightening it. So yeah, this is the set here. So let's take a look at it. So now this particular set is the 19-piece interchangeable screwdriver set from Draper. This is part of their Ergo Plus line. So they do this without torque handles and with torque handles. It's a whole set they do. And yeah, while Draper isn't maybe the best brand in the world, I'm sure it'll hopefully be good enough. Now, here's the packaging here. It does feel a little bit naff, like it's just a bit tacky. It just feels quite cheap having this big blister pack, and I'm going to absolutely destroy myself trying to open it. but as long as the tool's okay, I don't really mind. This is their 19-piece set. They do also do a smaller set, again with a torque driver that just has less bits and doesn't have these handles, but even the complete set was £80, so there's no point getting the cheaper one really for me. So take a look at what you get. So on the back it specifies what's actually included, including all the bits. So you get, obviously, the two handles, the torque handle, a 3mm, 4mm, 5.5 and 6.5mm slotted bit, Phillips 0, 1 and 2, Posi 0, 1 and 2, Torx T10, T15, T20, T25, and a number 1 and number 2 slotted Posi, which we'll take a look at. That's generally designed for things like terminals and circuit breakers. So yeah, that's the set there. So now time to get into it. Now, I'm just going to go and open it off camera, because if I try and open this on camera, I'm just going to end up bleeding everywhere because these packages are horrible, but let's go get it out and take a look. Okay, so I've now finally liberated it from that horrible packaging. That was an absolute nightmare to get out. And now we can take a look at the set. Now, you might already notice a bit of just dirt and marks on it. That's because I've actually gone away and used this. So I took it out, went to film the rest of the video, but then never got around to it. So I've gone away and actually used it quite extensively. So now I can give a tour of it and come back with my actual impression from using it for a while. So first of all, we'll just take a look at what you get in the set. You get 3 handles we'll take a look at individually, the carrying case, a manual, and then a calibration certificate. So obviously it's calibrated from the factory to some sort of standard that's presumably for torque screwdrivers or something, I don't know. Dated December 2020, so it's a good few months old now. I think you're to get them recalibrated every year, but that would more be if you're doing like certified electrical work where you need to like actually get it calibrated and prove it. It's not really a big deal for me, but yeah, you're obviously meant to get these recalibrated periodically. But how often you do that probably depends on maybe regulations in your country or whatever. Next up, you get the individual screwdriver blades, and you actually get quite a lot with this set. You get Phillips 0, 1 and 2, Posi 0, 1 and 2, 4 different flatheads. You get a 0.5 by 3mm, a 0.8 by 4mm, a 1mm by 5.5mm, and a 1.25 by 6.5mm. So you get a lot of flathead bits, which makes sense. You use them on a lot of electrical stuff, which I hate. I'd much rather have Posi or something, but yeah, we still get a lot of flatheads. You get a bunch of Torxes. You get a T10, T15, T20 and T25, and then you get these 2 slotted Posi bits. Now these, I don't know if there's actually a standard name for these or they're just common for electrical stuff, but essentially what it is it's a Posi screwdriver bit, but with a sort of flathead across it, like that. So it's a Posi bit, but then it's also got this integral flathead piece, and it's designed for screws that you'll see on, say, circuit breakers like this. If I loosen it off, you'll be able to see it better. But they're quite common on things like circuit breakers. I've also seen them on like the backs of like some switches and on things like back box screws for the earth terminals. It looks like that. So it's a Posi screw, but it's got like a flathead inside it. Now obviously that means you can just use either a flathead or a Posi bit, but using these gives you quite a lot of extra torque, and it makes it quite a lot harder to slip out. So you don't get any issues where you do it tight enough and too tight and it starts slipping out. And unlike a flathead, it can't slide out side to side, so it's actually a really nice screw. So it's good you get the 2 of these. You get one that's essentially equivalent to a Posi 2 and one that's equivalent to a Posi 1. So even though they're slotted Posi, you do get the 2 different sizes, which is good. Generally the slotted Posi 2 or whatever for things like circuit breakers, and the smaller one I found fits things like, yeah, grid switch modules and stuff like that use it. So yeah, you get a good set of blades, and they're not too expensive. I took a quick look to see how much it would cost to replace any of these if they broke, or if I just wanted extra ones that maybe aren't included here, or maybe I just wanted a couple of extras. They're only around £5 or £6 each, so they're not too bad to buy. In terms of durability, I've used a lot of these blades quite extensively, including with the torque driver and doing them really tightly, and I've not had any problems. Now, they're sort of black coated, and obviously over time that black does wear off quite a little bit on tip, but that's very normal. I've never had a screwdriver that's sort of black that's not done that, so that's fine. None of them have ever bent or anything, even like the quite thin ones, doing them quite tightly, I've not had any issues with them bending or getting damaged, so they do seem pretty durable, and they are cheap enough to replace if you ever had to. Next up, you've got 3 different handles. It's really nice getting the 3 different options here. So obviously there's a torque one, we'll take a look at that later because that's a bit more complicated. Then you get these 2 separate ones. You get this one here, this is essentially like a normal VDE screwdriver, so you take that, stick your bit in it. They're all very nice, they sort of clip in, hold it in and then you sort of push this little collar and it pops out and you can pull it out, which makes it really easy to swap them. And this just essentially acts like a normal VDE screwdriver. It's just a nice grippy handle and I'm really happy with it. I'm generally used to Vera screwdrivers, which have a really nice handle, but to be honest, this doesn't really feel much worse. It feels absolutely fine. So yeah, you've got that sort of normal handle there. And then separately, you've got this one here that they call, I think, the precision handle. And it makes sense. It's a bit like a, well, precision screwdriver. So what you can do, for example, is you can take a bit like that, slot it in, and it just makes a normal screwdriver. You can put, big ones in it if you wanted. But it means with this one, when you hold it, you can sort of grip this little rotating bit on the back with your hand and do that. Now, what I found this being really useful for, and I'm actually finding myself using this one more than this, is things like either terminal screws, especially when you're loosening off, it makes it really quick to just do that and loosen it, or screwing faceplates onto back boxes. Using this with a flathead, so obviously you're not going to use a slotty posi, but say using that flathead there, if I need to then screw, say, a socket or something back onto the wall, I find this really good because it means I can hold it like that and do it, first of all, quite quickly because the screws are usually quite long. But I also find this moves around like that a lot less. So when I'm trying to use a flathead screw on a very sort of nice decorative, brushed metal faceplate that's really easy to scratch, I really like using this because it means I can keep it much nice and stable and not have the screw slip out. Because if you're using one of these and you're just sort of going all over the place and it's wiggling all over the place and you slip out the screw, you're going to put a massive gouge at your faceplate and totally ruin it. So I find this was really good for that. This little handle is actually really nice. Additionally, just having a couple of handles is really handy to have because it means, for example, if I've got this one here that I'm using for all the faceplates and stuff like that, I can just leave it assembled, leave it on the side, then separately have this one with a different size bit in it, say a slightly wider flathead for other terminals or something like that, and I can then just quickly grab the two sets. I'm not needing to then constantly swap bits out. It's just nice being able to have one screwdriver on the side that's got a single bit in it that you can just grab to use. In fact, I could almost see myself, especially if I was doing this more or doing it professionally, I could almost see myself buying a couple of extra blades that I've already got, maybe buying a couple of flatheads or a couple of posi 2s, for example, just so I could leave one in one of the handles and then separately use it in the torque driver and not have to swap them about as much. It is just really nice having the two handles, so I'm definitely very happy with that. And yeah, this precision one is really, really nice. It's just a nice little bonus to have, I suppose. Now, before we get onto the torque driver, because that's obviously the bit that I need to really show in the most detail, the other thing you've got is the case. So this is it here. Now, if there was one thing that let this set down, it's probably this case. It does work, but it isn't quite big enough to hold everything. So what I'll do is I'll put everything in it and I'll show you the problem. Okay, so here's everything in the case. And as you can see, it does all fit. However, the issue with this case is just it's very, very tight to get everything in. So if we open it all out, you can see we've got all the bits. So you've got the torque screwdriver, the two different handles, and then all the individual bits. And it's pretty nice, they all pull out. It's very easy to access all the stuff. The only real issue is just that you need to actually roll it up and get the Velcro to stick. You really need to rotate it, turn it really tightly, and then sort of almost yank the Velcro to get it to stick. And it doesn't still stick the whole thickness. It kind of you get most of it, but it's still not fully there. So I maybe wouldn't feel super comfortable, for example, having this hanging off a bag or something and be traveling with it and not worry about it popping open. Now, if you can pack it very carefully like I've done here, it's actually okay. It's not amazing, but it's fine. But you just need to be very careful, in particular with the screwdriver handles, because you almost need to put the thicker handle at the thinner part of the torque screwdriver to get it all lined up. If I were just to, haphazardly chuck them in and do it the opposite way, put that one there and that one there, which would be very easy to do, to be honest, because it's not like you're exactly going to be thinking if you're just rushing to put your screwdriver away. If you were to do that, and then you're to try and tighten it up, the two handles kind of mesh together, and it becomes a lot harder to get the Velcro, and you can do the bottom easily, but then it's really hard to get the top Velcroed. I mean, you can, but it's not exactly holding on there. So the case is fine, but you do just need to make sure that you're very much putting these bits in the correct parts. I mean, I don't even know if that's the correct parts. It doesn't really specify where to put it. It just gives you a case and goes, good luck. But I found the best way, is to put the precision handle at the same sort of level as the handle of the torque screwdriver, and then put the normal sort of handle at the thinner part of the torque screwdriver, and then you can just about get it to close. But yeah, I feel this case, if they just made it the tiniest bit longer, literally an inch more material here, and it would have been so much better, it would have been brilliant. But just the fact that they've just made it that tiny little bit shorter on this lip flap here, just makes it a little bit too tight to do up. But, I mean, it's a minor gripe, it's totally fine. And then there is, I think, maybe a couple more bits here that you could probably squeeze a couple of extra screwdriver bits into if you had extras. But then if you did do that, you're going to start struggling for space in the case. So yeah, if they made it that a little bit longer, it would just be easier to shut, and you could potentially fit a couple more blades in without worrying about it being too tight. But yeah, at least you get a case. It's definitely nice to have to keep it all together. So now let's take a look at how we'd use this as a torque screwdriver. So obviously you've got the individual blades here. As a first test, I'm just going to put this wire into this MCB, just something simple. So I'll be using the slotted posi blade because that's what this MCB has. So I get like those handles, very easy, just slot it in. Now it is quite long and cumbersome, so like you probably wouldn't want to use this just all the time. You definitely maybe want to use the other handle, get it to sort of get wires in and then go and torque them afterwards, just because this is quite long and heavy and it does weigh on your arm a bit, but it's absolutely fine. And yeah, so you can adjust it. So the good thing with this one actually is you don't need any sorts of tools to adjust it. Some of the other ones, like I think the Vero, not the Vero ones, the Weha ones, you need a separate tool where you like pull that out, stick it in, screw it, and then clip it back. This one you can just do with this collar. And it go all the way from 1 Newton meter to 5 Newton meters. Although interestingly, there is actually a point below 1 Newton meter on the scale. And when you actually wind it to the loosest, it actually goes down to that point, like half below the 1. Now, it's only rated at 1 Newton meter to 5 Newton meters, so I don't know, is that half a Newton meter, or is that just like some sort of rest position? I wouldn't necessarily trust it as being half Newton meter if it, it isn't obviously potentially calibrated down to that level, if it's only rated for 1 Newton meter to 5 Newton meter. But yeah, it sort of rests below 1 Newton meter. And then what you do is you've got this collar here that you pop up and rotate to set the torque. So what's also interesting with this collar's numbered. It might be quite hard to make out, but that's a 0 there. And it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to 0 again. So this lets you really precisely set sort of decimal point increments. So if we say that on its loosest right now it's 0.5 Newton meters or just like that rest position, I don't know if it's calibrated to that. So we turn it right round, one rotation, back to 0 again. That's now 1 Newton meter, and you can maybe see it on the scale. Now with the scale you need to be quite careful because if you tilt it, obviously you can see it moves in relation to the numbers, so you need to look at it very much straight on. Although it'll be very hard to make it on camera, but on the inside of each of those, like inside that cutout, you can maybe see there's little grooves that go vertically down on the side of that chamber, and they line up with these marks on the top. So that does kind of let you sort of almost extend these marks down to be right against the scale, so you can kind of use those to benefit if you're looking off angle. But what I have found the other way you can do it is just counting when you're rotating this. So if you just do like one rotation, that's on 1 Newton meter, another rotation, that's on 1.5, another rotation, that's 2, because it's half a Newton meter per full rotation. So if we say right now on 2 Newton meters, if I wanted 2.5 again, I just obviously rotate it all the way around, clip it down, and that's 2.5. If we turn it back again to 0, the other way, we're now going to be on 2 Newton meters again. But what's really good with this collar is you can set it in very precise increments. In fact, according to the manual, this can be set in 0.02 Newton meter increments. So this is on 2 Newton meters now. If I wanted 2.5, obviously I'd rotate it a whole rotation. But if I wanted, say, 2.3 Newton meters, well, I'll rotate this collar until it lands on 3. And that's now 2.3. And then if I wanted, presumably, 2.32, I just turn it one more notch to the right there. So it's really precise to actually get very precise measurements that are beyond what you'd be able to actually visualize on this scale. So this collar is really good. Yes, this scale is a little bit tricky because you do have to kind of make sure you view it on axis or follow those lines down or just count the rotations. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. And if I turn it back there, again, we're going to be back on 2 Newton meters. So it's really pretty easy to work and definitely not needing any external tools good. The scale of this as well is also really good because a lot of other ones, even like the £150 Vera set, they only go up to 3 Newton meters, whereas this goes up to 5. So that's quite good because for stuff I'm doing, I'm not going to need anything up to 5, but apparently on some like 100 amp main switches and things like that, they sometimes need not 5 Newton meters, but they need more than 3. So it's really good having that large scale there. So now to just do the test, we'll just stick it to this. Now, this MCB is an old one, so it doesn't actually have a rating printed on it. But from memory, on the Hager website, I think Hager MCBs should have, I think it's 2.5. Obviously, it doesn't really matter. I'm just testing here. So I'll just do it to 2.5 newton meters just as a test. So that was on 2. So turn around one more to get 2.5. There. And then we can now terminate this. So do that, stick the wire in. And that's obviously it's way too far open. So just tighten that up. But you see what I mean here, when you're trying to just do like a lot of it, this is quite a long screwdriver to do it with. So yeah, you're probably better using a smaller one and then tightening up with this. Which is why it could be nice having multiple bits of the same size, because you could then, for example, have that one to torque everything up, separately have the same slotted posi bit in the other handle, use it, and then just quickly swap rather than having to actually swap blades over. But yeah, so then stick the wire in there, and then we can tighten it up. So it's obviously not easy to do on camera or when it's not actually mounted in something, but do that there, and that's now tight. And now we can torque it. So if I just turn this to the right, after a while, it'll click. And that's it now hit the torque limit. So now no matter how much more I turn this, it'll just keep clicking and it won't get any tighter. So that's where this is really good. So that's now set to the correct torque setting. And then later on, if I come along and, you know, if I've maybe moved the wire around a little bit and I want to make sure it's definitely tight enough, I can just go in and just torque it again. And I know that that's set to the correct setting, but I'm not going to over tighten it by repeatedly going back to it. So yeah, it works absolutely fine. And then you can obviously undo it as well. Now, one quirk I found with this is that it actually does torque in both directions. Now, I don't think that's a calibrated thing, but it is something I found that's worth bearing in mind. Because, for example, where I found it being a bit tricky is if I were to say to stick a screw into a wire into an MCB like this and tighten it up. Like that, get it really tight. Okay? Now if I want to loosen it off, now the way I would sort of visualise this, and it's where I found the issue, was where it was in the consumer unit already terminated, and clearly when it had been done previously, it had been done far too tight, it had been way over tightened. Now I wanted to take that wire out, but I had the torque screwdriver set to the correct torque setting for that MCB because that was just what I'd previously been doing. So I went in with the torque screwdriver set to the correct torque setting, the screw was over tightened, so then when I went to undo it, it just kept like clicking off at the torque because it was, the torque of this was set to less than the torque the screw was done up to. So I then had to actually go and get a separate handle and use that to undo it. Now, I don't know if there's a reason for that. I don't know if there's any benefit to having it doing it in both directions because, I mean, you turn right to tighten a screw. So, I mean, maybe you could use it to see how tight something is, you know. But it does seem a bit weird having it also do the torque for the loosening as well, because it means you can't really loosen with this screwdriver unless this is already looser than your torque setting. So it would have been nice if it only did it in one direction, but maybe there is a use case I'm not aware of where you might want it to torque in the opposite direction. Reverse direction screws, are they a thing? I don't know. But yeah, that's one minor quirk, but yeah, it works really well. Finally, I think the only thing that's really worth mentioning is just something that I saw in the manual, and I think I saw it mentioned online as well in various places. It's just down here where it says, in order to extend the life, it should be adjusted to the minimum value if the product is not to be used for a long period. Now I can see that being quite easy to forget, but yeah, as you're tightening up the torque setting, the higher you go, the more resistance you feel to crank it. So I suspect in here you're maybe like tightening a spring as you're turning it. So I think the idea with that is that if you left it set to a high torque setting, that spring's then going to be sitting compressed or something like that. And over time that could, you know, almost remember it and it would get less accurate. So it just says basically when you're finished with it, just wind it down to the lowest torque setting, which you can just do that until it stops, and that should just extend its life. So I thought it was worth mentioning that just to make it clear, just because it does say that in the manual. And what it does also here actually is, it says, interestingly, it says only for clockwise torque tightening, cannot be used on reverse thread fixings. So that's interesting with me saying it, you know, it does torque in both directions, even though here it says it can only be used for clockwise torque tightening. But I suspect that's maybe just a sort of calibration thing. Maybe they only test it, or the standard only allows it to really work for torquing clockwise, so they can't, you know, claim that it can work the other way because it's not been calibrated or something. So yeah. But yeah, it's definitely really pretty good. Now the other use case I've been trying this out for is these click-defined sockets from Skolmore, because these are the ones that specify that you should tighten them up to 2.5 newton meters in the manual. So I think officially, based on the whole regulation around following manufacturer's instructions, you should do that. I mean, I don't think many people will, and I honestly wouldn't blame them for not doing it. But actually just trying this out on this, I really like it. To the extent that I can actually see myself using this, even when a torque setting isn't specified in the manual, just to get things at least consistent. You know, pick a torque setting that I feel happy with, and then just have it consistent. Because, for example, if you just, stick a little bit of twin earth in here just to try it out, like that. Stick them into the terminal there, and then we tighten it up. And these do specify to do them up to 2.5 newton meters. Now, it is a flathead screw, so it's a bit trickier to get the torque on, and you do need to be very careful and make sure you go in at an absolute perfect angle, because if you go in at a slightly off angle, you have to do it so tightly to get to that level that it's quite easy to accidentally strip the screw. But if you do that, keep tightening, and then eventually it'll click and torque at the right torque setting. And that's now done. So I've been doing that to all the sockets I've been putting in, and again, yeah, I know people are going to comment and say it's unnecessary, but the confidence that gives me is really good, because I now know they're the correct tightness. But what I then like to do if I'm putting a socket on, imagine all the other wires are in. I mentioned it earlier, but when I'm now going to put this into the capacitor's box, that annoyingly, oh, there's one, got to hand you, put that into the capacitor's box there. Obviously the wires need to bend, so you're going to put it in and the wires are probably internally going to bend around like that. And then once those wires are bent, they've potentially moved inside that terminal, so generally it's seen as good practice then to then sort of ease it off from the wall and tighten it up just to make sure it's tight. But when I'm doing that with a normal screwdriver, sure I can pull it off and tighten it up and make sure it's still tight, but my hand isn't calibrated to a torque setting, so if I'm doing that I might not tighten it as much as I did originally, or I might feel like I want to feel some sort of movement to tighten it, so I might end up over tightening it by tightening it so much it then turns. But because this is set to the right torque setting, those wires have now been moved. I can go in again, do that, turn it again. There is slight movement there because the wire's obviously settled, but now it's at the right torque setting. So there's a tiny amount of movement there, but I'm not over tightening it. So I can do that as much as I want. I can then ease it off the wall, fiddle things around, try and get something in, do it, torque it up again, and I can just keep doing that and not worry about over tightening it. So yeah, the confidence this gives me is actually really nice. It's definitely quite good for that. And especially because it's relatively affordable, I don't feel bad having spent 80 odd pounds on this set just to put some sockets on. If it has spent 150 quid on like a Vera set for something that it's not really necessary for, that's quite a lot of money. But this is affordable enough that it's not necessarily a bad idea just having it. Now, with the socket, what I found while tightening it is that actually to get it to 2.5 newton meters, I have to crank that a lot tighter than I normally would when installing a socket. So, I mean, that's quite good. It's showing I'm actually tightening them up properly, and maybe previously I wasn't doing them tight enough. But another thing I found this really good for is not over-tightening things that shouldn't be that tight. So an example for that I found is things like 1mm cables and light switches. So I'll just do a quick test here to really sort of do one up by hand, maybe a bit too tightly, and do one up with a torque screwdriver. Now, normally if I was putting a 1mm into a light switch on its own, like on a single conductor, I would double it over, but just for sake of demonstration to almost show like the worst case scenario, I won't. So if I do that and then tighten it up by hand, and this is what I've been bad for before, is doing that and going like, oh, is that tight enough? And then tightening it a bit more, and then going, still not sure if that's tight enough, doing it more, and just keeping tightening it. And then getting to the point where the screw barely stops, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably tight enough, and then I stop. And I've now probably very much over-tightened that. And then I'll maybe, move the wires around, ease it away from the wall, go, oh, I'll just tighten up a little bit more, and I'll go in again, and I'll just crank it a little bit more till there's a bit more movement. And I've probably at that point massively over-tightened that conductor. Whereas what I've now done is I've set the torque screwdriver to a sort of very low torque setting, but one that feels sensible for such a thin wire in a small terminal. Because this switch, obviously, is an old switch, doesn't specify a torque setting. But with that setting I feel comfortable with, I can put that wire in there, tighten up the torque setting, like that, and then obviously when I get to the tight enough point, it'll then limit me, like that. Now, both those wires feel perfectly secure. That's not pulling out, that's perfectly tight in there. But what this now means is, like before, if I've moved these wires around behind the wall, I can come in and go, right, let's just check it's tight enough, go in with torque, and just, yep, that seems fine. So now I've done that, what if I take those out and look at the wires, just to see if over-tightening this one has actually made it worse. So first of all, we'll take out the longer one, which is one I did up to the correct, well, to a sort of set torque setting. Take that one out. Like that. And then separately, let's take a look at this one that I majorly cranked super tightly because I wasn't, confident it was tight enough and wanted to make sure it was properly tight. Let's take both of those out. And now let's look at the difference. So straight away I can see a difference here. That's the one that was tightened up by hand super tightly. And you can see it's all crushed and like flattened out. And I'm pretty sure if I were to then bend this a little bit, maybe, yep, there you go. If I bend that by hand, I can pretty easily snap that end off. And actually in my flat, I found several switches, or even in the consumer unit, several circuits where the 1 mils had been done so tightly that that happened. And that's not even on the ones that I put in. On a lot of the original stuff that had been put in here by the builders, there was a lot of wires that had been so tightly screwed in, especially the consumer unit, that they just snapped off like that. So that's not good. Whereas this one here, that I've done with torque screwdriver, yes, it's flattened off, but you can see in comparison, it doesn't bend as much. It's at least a little bit more solid, and it's not all kinked. It's still straight. So that does show that actually, yeah, even on something like a really small terminal with a small wire in it, using the torque screwdriver, even when there's not a known torque setting, just helps me get it consistent and not over tighten it when I'm just trying to make sure it's tight enough. So yeah, even for something like that you really wouldn't normally need to use it for, it is just quite nice to have. It gives me a lot more confidence. So yeah, very happy with it. So there you go. That was a look at this Draper torque screwdriver set. And yeah, I'm really happy with it. Obviously, I can't speak for the full long-term reliability. This is a lot cheaper than other tools from, say, Vera or Weha. So, it might not be as durable long-term if you're using it. I don't know, I can't speak for that. I've only really had it a week or so. But from what I've used of it, I'm really happy with it and can't really think of what a more expensive set would really give me. It's got all the features I need. It's got a good torque range. The bits all seem perfectly durable. I mean, I'm not necessarily super nice to my screwdrivers, and I've not had any problems with them. And having these extra handles is really good. This precision one's great for certain things, and just being able to have multiple screwdrivers on hand without having to constantly swap blades over is really good. Even if you just were working with someone else and someone needed a separate screwdriver bit to you, you could actually give them a different handle with a bit in it and not need to constantly be swapping them. So yeah, I'm really happy with it. And in terms of the price, this just seems like such good value. Now, I love Vera screwdrivers, but their closest equivalent set to this with all the extra handles is £150. Then even from Weha, as I mentioned earlier, their equivalent set is maybe about £125. So being able to pick this up for about £80 quite easily, it just seems like really good value. So definitely very happy with it. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're interested in buying this, there's links in the description.